When do you know it's time to quit your novel? When the ideas stop coming, which they inevitably do, what does that mean? I get asked this fairly often and I have thoughts. Today, we're gonna talk about how to know when it's time to give up on your novel and how to know when you should keep going. Let's go. I revised my first novel many times, but I only gutted it and started completely over once. It was a few years into writing it, and I was in a writing class with an instructor who was a highly accomplished editor. She told me she had an idea for what my novel should be, and her novel was so far from what I'd written that it was clear to me I was gonna have to write an entirely different novel if I went that direction. I wasn't particularly excited about the novel she had in mind, but she was the accomplished book editor and I was nobody. So I assumed I should do what she thought. I started completely over with new characters, with the characters she thought should be at the heart of my story. And months later, I had a working half draft that was exhausting to me. I didn't like it. And when I shared it with others, because I was still very into getting feedback at the time, they didn't seem very excited by it either. I had restarted my entire project based on someone else's opinion and my own fear. And it led to a dead end. Spoiler alert, that draft went nowhere. I ditched it. Listen, there are times when we abandon projects or we completely gut them or we start over. Sure, I have definitely had a number of false starts in my day. But far more often, our impulse to start over isn't actually rooted in a need to start over. It's fear, and fear is never a good reason to start over. Here's the truth. Every novelist hits a wall around the 30% or 50% mark of a first draft. Everyone. Now, if everyone does, then everyone doesn't need to start over, right? So, what's going on? Well, what is happening often when you hit the bottom of your ideas bucket is that the work itself, as in your story, the story you have been writing, is telling you that it needs something new to happen. It's time within the story to shake things up. We have reached a natural turning point. I'm saying that hitting your 30 to 50% of your draft wall does not mean that you have had a bad novel idea or that it's going nowhere or that you are headed toward a dead end. I'm saying this is a natural feeling in a natural moment when the story is telling you that something needs to happen, something new to engage you as the writer and therefore also the reader. Because if you're bored as the writer, the reader is also bored. Now, no need to scrap everything you've written just because you've gotten a little bored. You know, we weren't bored 10 pages ago. You weren't bored when you started the novel. You just are now. So now is the time to shake things up. When this invariably happens to me, here's what I do. I set my draft aside. I'm usually writing in a notebook, so I literally put the notebook aside. I get out a separate notebook, separate from my draft notebook, one where I just have notes and stuff. I start brainstorming ideas. What could happen? You don't want to judge any of these ideas. You just want to come up with anything that comes to mind. You know, you're not evaluating anything. You know, it could be aliens could land. That's fine to write down. A hurricane could hit. Someone could die. Someone could be resurrected. Two people could get together. You're not judging any of these ideas because that's the opposite of a brainstorm, right? You're letting yourself go wild. And somewhere in there, you'll probably see something, some idea that makes you think, oh, that's kind of exciting. You may even feel a little bit nervous about it, like, ooh, can I do that? You know, it'll feel like it has this really fun energy to it that also feels a little bit daring. And if you're a little bit nervous, that's a good sign. That's usually the one that you want to write. Now, a second ago, I said, you know, I invariably get bored, but maybe that's not you. Maybe you aren't bored, you're just doubtful. Maybe you've started questioning yourself, you know, or the project, is this even something you should keep doing? Are you the right person to do it? Maybe you start to worry that you lack the skill to write this novel. All of this is the same thing. Whether it's boredom or self-doubt or doubt in the project, I see this as the story announcing to you that something new needs to happen. Okay, real fast before I go on, I want to invite you to apply to the Book Incubator. It's a 12-month MFA alternative that I started and that I now run with novelist Rufi Thorpe. You can apply at the link below. It's only 2 questions. It'll take you under 5 minutes. And if you're writing a novel, you'll definitely want to check it out. Back to the video. So like I said, I get bored, and for me, that's the danger, because if I'm bored, I don't show up to write. But, and this is where the psychology comes in, if you don't show up to write, you can't disappoint yourself, right? Like, see how good our brains are at protecting us from pain, but this is false protection, because if you actually ditch your project or start over again and again, another 2 or 4 or 10 years go by, and you still haven't written this book, and you actually feel even worse. So here's the thing. Whether you're feeling self-doubt or boredom or doubt in your idea, whether your ideas have run dry or, your confidence has run dry, none of these are reasons to abandon your novel idea and start another one. They're not. They're just not. I think self-doubt is especially misleading because typically it means you've kind of turned inward on yourself, which means you're no longer looking at your characters, right? You're not looking like into the story. You're kind of dwelling inward and thinking about your own ego, which isn't gonna lead you anywhere helpful because the story isn't about you, right? And your ego. Like you've now looked away from the thing you wanna be looking at. Still, it's very normal to do this. It's also still information telling you that the story is inviting you to change it up. Let me put it one last way in case this is the one that sticks. When you feel yourself starting to peter out at 30,000 words or 10,000 words, the story has gotten slack. You're not wrong. Something does need to change in the story. But the thing that has to change isn't the book that you're writing or the author who's writing it. It's something happening in the story itself. So whenever I start to think, around a midway point, man, I've gotten kind of bored, I now see it as good information. All it means is that it's time for me to step aside and brainstorm. Speaking of writing a book, are you writing a book or do you want to write a book? Because if so, I would love to hear from you. When I'm not writing, I'm running my 12-month MFA alternative called the Book Incubator. If you're curious to know more, I have a free video walking you through my 4 notebooks method for writing a novel. And you can get it and my free template for using the 4 notebooks method by applying to the Book Incubator. The application is only 2 questions. It'll just take you a couple minutes. I just ask you to tell me a little bit about you and your book or your book idea. I hope to hear from you.